All right, well, let's get started. I'll open us, just turn to the Lord. Father, we bow before you, so thankful for another day. Thank you for life that is we have within our bodies, Father. The physical life we enjoy is from you. And thank you that we have the life of Christ in us as well. I just pray that as we study 1 Kings today, you will show us the relevance of what has happened in these events that we look at that would be meaningful to us and impactful in our lives today. By your Spirit, I pray you'll open your word for each of us. I pray the same thing for our children and our youth as they study as well today, and be with their teachers and be with them, that your word may impact their lives in very meaningful ways, Father, in order that we might all be better conformed to the image of Jesus in his name. Okay, let's do a kind of a quick review of maybe that's a good reminder to turn it on. Let's do a quick review of 1 Kings. We're at 1 Kings 20. So with the messages on Solomon, with the studies that we've been in 1 Kings a long time. And it really began with the end of David's life. Solomon is his successor. We know how all that came about. With Solomon, the United Kingdom, he served the United Kingdom. 40 years he was in power. 20 of those years, or maybe 20 plus, you can't be exactly sure, but they were good years. They were very good years. The temple was constructed. God did through him the things that he had indicated he would do with Solomon. And then things went south for him. You remember what the primary problem was that Solomon had. There were several things he did that violated God's instruction in Deuteronomy, but what was the main, what I will call the main thing?
Foreign wives.
Foreign wives. The wives turned his heart away, and he began to worship idols and build things to them. So, at the end of his life, God says, I'm taking the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, and I'm giving them to someone else. And he does it right at the death of Solomon, but he gives them to Jeroboam. And you remember the promise that he made to Jeroboam. If you will walk in my ways, if you will honor my word, if you will be like David, I will do for you what I did for him. This is an opportunity for Jeroboam to really walk with the Lord and honor him. Problem was Jeroboam didn't do that because he was self-centered. He had lack of faith to trust that God would do what God had promised. And you remember he built altars in the northern kingdom and at Bethel, and then up north in Dan, because he didn't want the people to go to Jerusalem to worship, because then they may not follow him. So he's trying to provide for himself, and he does that by stepping outside what God's revealed will for him was. So have we seen any godly kings in the northern kingdom since Jeroboam? No, we have not. And we've come now into the line of Omri, and his son is Ahab. And Ahab's big problem that has turned his heart away was what? His wife. She came from the Sidonians who worshiped the Baals. And he built a house to Baal. He's just, his father Omri was the worst king in the northern kingdom up to that time. Ahab has exceeded his father and now bears that title himself. So I just thought as we looked at that and reviewed a little bit, what are the lessons the readers of 1 Kings, these who were apparently in exile at the time, what are the lessons they are to get from reading these accounts in 1 Kings, and then we follow that with what are the lessons for us out of 1 Kings and what we've seen as we've seen today. What do we learn about God in 1 Kings? Well, let me prompt you a little bit. I think we see Exodus 34, 6, and 7, one of Justin's favorites. But I think we see that here because we see God's compassion throughout this. We're going to see it today in the life of Ahab. Grace from him. Slow to anger as these kings, one after another, follow in the footsteps of Jeroboam. And he's abounding in loving kindness and truth. And yet at the same time, as verse 7 points out in Exodus 34, he does not ignore those who walk away from him. He doesn't leave the guilty unpunished, and visits the iniquity of the fathers on children generations beyond that. And we really see that. So hopefully they are seeing, as they read this in exile, they are seeing the character of their God and how patient and gracious he was as he dealt with the northern kingdom in these chapters in 1 Kings. And even though they continually, through their leadership, rejected him, and basically as the king went, so did most of the nation. So how the king responded to God was very, very important. So let's look now at Ahab in chapter 20. We're going to see in chapter 20 two crises. I love the way one fellow I read outlined this, and I've borrowed it. We're going to see the first crisis in verses 1 through 12. And then we're going to see, following that crisis, we're going to see the encouragement of a prophet. And then finally, we're going to see the fulfillment of what the prophet said. And this is going to take place in the first part of chapter 20, and then it will repeat, same outline, second crisis. It follows the same outline as these first 16 verses or so of chapter 20. So that's what we're going to see. Let's start looking at it now let's look at these first 4 verses, and you'll see what the crisis is. There's definitely one here. Now Ben-Hadad, and that's a son of Hadad, the king of Aram, and that may be a title there as opposed to a person's name. There's some debate about that. But probably not the same Ben-Hadad we saw back in chapter 15. It may not ring a bell for you, but this is probably a second Ben-Hadad. But he's king of Aram, and he gathered all his army, and there were 32 kings with him. Now these were probably kings in the lower case K. They may have been tribal leaders, that kind of thing. And horses and chariots. And he went up and besieged Samaria. You remember Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom, since Omri built the city. That's where Ahab's capital city is for the northern kingdom. He went up and besieged Samaria and fought against it. Verse 2, then he sent messengers to to the city, to Ahab, pardon me, king of Israel, and said to him, this is what Ben-Hadad says, your silver and your gold are mine. Your most beautiful wives and children are also mine. That's a bold statement. That's a statement of confidence by a king who knows he is on the cusp of being able to wipe out Samaria and Ahab. Your silver and your gold, they're mine. Your most beautiful wives and children, the best of your wives and children there, are now mine. And the king of Israel replied, as you say, my lord, O king, I am yours, as well as all that I have. Ahab, it's just stunning to think that a man in his position would say, you want my wives? Sure. You want my kids? Yeah. I'm devoted to you. He is the king of the northern kingdom. What a response. You notice there is no pause to even think about crying out to God. Talking to a prophet. What should I do? They're much more powerful than we are. They've got us surrounded. And this demand comes. What should I do? Never happens. He just says, I'll capitulate. There's a lot of belief that he regarded this, let's say belief, a lot of commentators pick up on this, it may be true, that he regarded this as the kind of thing where you might say, you have the right to take possession of what I own, but you're really not going to do it. So it's no big deal if I give you the right to do it, as long as you're not exercising that right. So I still have my silver, still have my gold, still have my family, others have their families. There's some thought that may be how he perceived it. This is the first crisis, and it goes on. But yet, God sends him a message in his disobedience, in his waywardness, and says, I'm going to hand this great multitude over to you today. Why? So you will know I am Yahweh. And the word know there is the Hebrew word, just means that it's also used, let me give you, I think I have it a little later, another reference to it. It's used in Psalm 139 in verse 2. The same word, and the word is yada. You know when I sit down. You know when I stand up. You understand my thought from afar. It's a word that means you will perceive, you will understand, you will grasp that I am the Lord. Why am I doing this? So you can know who I am, Ahab. What's also interesting here, I think, is as you look at what the prophet says, I'm going to hand them over to you today. That you, second person, is singular. He's handing them over to Ahab. And you, singular, shall know that I am the Lord. They're in a crisis. They're about to be wiped out. Without asking the Lord, he appears through a prophet and says, I'm going to deliver them over to you. Let's add 14 to it. But Ahab said, by whom? How are you going to do that? Is really what he's saying. And the prophet says, the Lord says this, by the young men of the leaders of the provinces. Then Ahab said, who will begin the battle? And the prophet said, you will. You again, there is singular. So Ahab is given responsibility. Either he is to lead out on the charge, or it may mean that he will send his troops out. But they are to initiate the battle. I just want to pause there for a minute. Can you think of times in your life when you were not asking for God's help? You're not asking for his provision, his grace, his mercy in your life. And yet he sent it anyhow. I'll give you a quick personal story. When I was in law school, those were the worst spiritual times of my life. I was not pursuing the Lord, though I knew him. I was walking my own path. I thought I could solve and make decisions about whatever affected me. And I'm walking down that path, and I end up working for a lawyer in my second year of law school. He becomes a mentor to me. And one week at work, he gave me a research project and said, could you get that to me, whatever you find, on Sunday? Well, Patty and I were going to a church where I felt very comfortable. It was in, I won't tell you the name of it, but it was in Hillsborough Village. And we could go in, nobody would speak to us. We could sit there, we could leave, nobody spoke to us, and as far as I was concerned, the best thing was nobody visited us. I was not used to three to thrive, as Jerry used to say, and I didn't like the visitations of people coming midweek unannounced, and a middle-aged couple show up to this, I'm like 25. So on that particular Sunday, we would go to our church, so to speak, so I could get a big check mark. So when my mom and dad said, did you go to church? Certainly did. Certainly did. Check that off. Well, this Sunday I said, well, maybe we just ought to go to his church because it's on the way and make it easier. So we did. I took the project, gave it to him there at church. So we sit toward the back, kind of the middle of the big center section, big auditorium. And I can't remember anything about the message. Can tell you zero about it. But what was significant and turns out to be life-changing is that service is over and we're starting to exit. I remember we were still in the aisle, and Patty goes, there's Terry. Who? There's Terry. He's the band director at my school. Huh. She knows somebody who is there. So I get to meet Terry, we get to meet Kathy, and we have a connection. And all of a sudden we find there are a whole slew of young couples like us, no kids, and we're going, huh, this is kind of neat. It was that put me on a path to completely change my relationship with the Lord. A lot happened after that, but it was literally, had we not gone there that day, was I saying, Lord, show us what we ought to do today? No. But a small example of something that would seem tiny, but you look back on it and go, if she hadn't known Terry, we would have probably walked out and never gone back. But that the Lord used that to then move us in a different direction, and in particular to move me. So His grace is here for Ahab. I want us to see His grace in our lives at times where, sometimes when we ask, yes, see it there as well. And also see it in times when we don't ask. It's just wonderful. Let's go to verse 15. So he mustered the young men, the leaders of the provinces, and there were 232. It's not real big. These are young guys. These are not seasoned warriors. And after them he mustered all the people, all the sons of Israel, 7,000. Now 7,000 rings a bell, doesn't it? 7,000 had not bowed the knee to Baal. Is that the same 7,000? We're not told. But all the sons of Israel that are marshaled together are 7,000. They are not going to overwhelm the Syrians. Verse 16. They went out at noon while Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the temporary shelters with the 32 kings who were helping him. The young men of the leaders of the provinces went out first, and Ben-Hadad sent out scouts, and they reported to him, saying, men have come out from Samaria. Now listen to what Ben-Hadad said. If they have come out for peace, take them alive. Or if they've come out for war, take them alive as well. It does have a little bit of a sound of somebody you might not be thinking real clearly. However you find them, keep them alive. He's not expecting anything major, of course. So these men went out from the city, the young men of the leaders of the provinces and the army which followed them, and they killed each one his man. And the Arameans fled, and Israel pursued them, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, escaped on a horse with horsemen. King of Israel also went out. And I have to chuckle at this in 21. Who's going to start all this? Who's going to lead? The prophet said, you. Well, he goes out, but not until others have kind of paved the way. But he goes out and struck the horses and chariots and killed the Arameans in a great slaughter. So that's the fulfillment of the oracle. Major victory for the little nation of Israel. Major victory. But now the prophet comes back in verse 22 with a warning to him. There's a follow-up here. Then the prophet approached the king of Israel and said to him, go show yourself courageous and be aware and see what you have to do, for at the turn of the year the king of Aram will march against you. So this is not over. What did he need to do? What do you think the point of the prophet saying that to him is? Given what he's just been through, what does he need to do to be courageous and get ready for the return of the king of Haran? Of Haran. Exactly. He needs to turn to the Lord so his people will also turn to the Lord. It's not about put your troops in training, so that you get the Marine portion of them really ready to go, and we'll be stronger next time than we were this time. I don't think that's it. I think he's saying, be courageous. not in the fighting here, but in standing for the Lord. How do you get ready to face another battle from a great nation? And at the turn of the year, the king of Aram will come back. Kings often went to war in the spring. Grass would be available for the animals. It would be easier to feed and care for them. In 2 Samuel 11:1, it's the phrase that many of you will recognize. Then it happened in the spring, at the time kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and David stayed at Jerusalem. And you remember what happens after that with Bathsheba. He didn't go out to war. So we look on down at verse 23, and we see what's going on with the folks in Syria. Now the servants of the king of Aram said to him, their gods, that's Israel, their gods of the mountains. For that reason, they were stronger than we. But let us fight them in the plain, and we will certainly be stronger than they. Carry out this plan. Remove the kings, each from his place, and put governors in their place. And muster an army, that, like the army you have lost, horse for horse, chariot for chariot. Then we will fight against them in the plain, and we will certainly be stronger than they. And they listened to their voice and did so. So in contrast to what the prophet told Ahab, the Syrians are looking at this and saying, well, we lost. Their gods are gods of the mountains, and that's where we were. That's why we lost. We'll take them on the plain because we'll be stronger on the plain. So forget these kings. Get seasoned military people. They're going through the preparations, the human preparations for war. We can get better. We'll have all of our horses back. We'll have the force that we had when we headed that way the last time. And we'll take them on the flat ground. And with our chariots and with our military force, we'll take them out. We're stronger than they are. So that's how they prepared. So we have the second crisis as we get, you can see it building, but as we get to verse 26, here they come again. So at the turn of the year, Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans, and they went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. Let me just give you a very quick look at Aphek. Oh, come on now. I'll get it. Here it is. Can you see that? Or not? Okay. You see Samaria? There's also an Aphek that is a Philistine city that's more to the south and to the west. This is, scholars don't think that was the city that's referenced. This is a different Aphek that is probably flat ground near the Sea of Galilee on the east side, likely on the east side of it. So that's what's pictured there. You can see where that is from Samaria, so that this battle is going to be joined in a different place. It is going to occur right where the Syrians want it to happen. Flat ground. Chariots. They ought to be able to prevail. Except for the fact that God will intervene again. So look at verse 27 with me. And the sons of Israel were mustered and given provisions, and they went to meet them. And the sons of Israel camped opposite them like two little flocks of goats. while the Arameans filled the country. Why does God over and over and over create the David and Goliath scenario?
Show his strength and their need for dependence on him.
Right. Over and over, he sets Israel up. And I've read this. I wasn't able to look at it extensively, but I've read that Israel never won a battle that God did not deliver them through. He's making it very clear that they are weak and inadequate as they go out on the plains here of Aphek to deal with this Syrian force. And they look like two little flocks of goats out there compared to the Arameans. Verse 28, that's the crisis. Here comes the word from the Lord that is the prophetic encouragement, if you will. And he says, then the man of God approached and spoke to the king of Israel and said, this is what the Lord says. Yahweh has spoken. Since the Arameans have said, the Lord is a God of the mountains, but not a God of the valleys. Therefore I will hand over to you all this great multitude, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Very similar message to the last prophetic message to Ahab. Here, he says, I will hand over to you, singular. That's important. I will hand over to you all this great multitude, and you, plural, meaning Ahab and the nation, shall know that I am Yahweh. I am your covenant-making, covenant-keeping God. When it says hand over to you, that is a phrase that means God is giving them over for destruction to him. Deuteronomy 7:24 says, and he will hand over their kings to you, so that you will eliminate their name from under heaven. And no one will be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. Deuteronomy 20:13. When the Lord God gives it, which is the city, into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. When God hands it over, when God gives them into your hand, that's language for destruction. Complete destruction. It's important to recognize that that's what is intended here. Verse 29, fulfillment. So they camped one opposite the other for 7 days. And on the 7th day, the battle was joined. And the sons of Israel killed of the Arameans 100,000 foot soldiers in a single day. Two little groups of goats, and they're wiped out. But the rest fled to Aphek, into the city, and the wall fell on 27,000 men who were left. What's this remind you of? Jericho. It's an echo, if you will, of what happened in Jericho. This wall collapsed, and 27,000 of those who were left died. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city, going from one inner room to another. Can you just sort of picture that? He is trying to stay alive. This wall, huge wall, has collapsed, and his people have died, but he's darting from place to place in the city trying to stay alive. Verse 31. We see the victory. We see the fulfillment of what the prophet said. And now we come to a time of compromise. But his servant said to him, "Behold now, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Please, let's put sackcloth around our waists and ropes on our heads and go out to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will let you live." So, sackcloth on these guys demonstrates submission. They're humbled before the king of Israel. Ropes on their heads may even mean around their necks to symbolize, you've got us. We are in submission to you. You can lead however you desire. So that's what they do. They're signaling, we're submitting to you. Verse 30. So they put sackcloth around their waists and ropes on their heads and came to the king of Israel and said, "Your servant," now remember what Ben-Hadad had said he would do. Now he's a servant to Ahab. "Your servant Ben-Hadad says, 'Please let me live.'" And Ahab said, "Is he still alive? He is my brother." That's a clue. That's a clue. Brother, obviously not in the biological sense, but he's regarding him as an equal. He's a king too. We have that in common. But his servant said to him, "Behold now, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings." I'm sorry. Let me jump on down to 33. My apologies. "Now the men took this as a good omen, and quickly accepting it from him, they said, 'Your brother, Ben-Hadad.' Then he said, 'Go bring him.' Then Ben-Hadad came out to him, and he had him mount the chariot." He is bringing him up to a level where he is in his chariot. He is giving him much more than he should have. Verse 34. Then Ben-Hadad said to him, "The cities which my father took from your father I will restore, and you can make streets for yourself in Damascus as my father made in Samaria." Ahab said, "And I will let you go with this covenant." So he made a covenant with him and let him go. So notice Ahab's thinking. I can cut a deal that makes sense. I will get cities back that we lost. I will get a right for my people to trade in Damascus. That'll be good. I will have an ally here. The problem was, this was not what the Lord commanded. Ahab's looking to himself to provide for the future. I can cut a deal. This is a better result than killing Ben-Hadad. We hear from yet another prophet. Verse 35, "Now a man from the sons of the prophets said to another, 'By the word of the Lord, please strike me.' But the man refused to strike him. And he said to him, 'Because you have not listened to the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you.' And as soon as he left him, a lion found him and killed him." What's that remind you of? The prophet at Bethel. Remember that God sent to Bethel to confront who was it, Jeroboam there. And that prophet was to eat nothing, take nothing, go back home, and another prophet convinces him to come and have dinner. And then the Lord speaks to that prophet, and the first prophet is killed by a lion. Then he found another man. This is this prophet, the son of the prophets, and said, "Please strike me." And the man struck him, injuring him. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the road and disguised himself with a bandage over his eyes. You can picture the scene. And as the king passed by, he cried out to the king and said, "Your servant went out into the midst of the battle, and behold, a man turned aside and brought a man to me and said, 'Guard this man. If for any reason he goes missing, then your life shall be forfeited in place of his life, or else you shall pay a talent of silver.' Now while your servant was busy here and there, he disappeared. And the king of Israel, Ahab, said to him, 'So shall your judgment be. You yourself determined it.'" Verse 41, "Then he quickly took the bandage away from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him, that he was one of the prophets." Sure how he recognized him. Did he know him from before? Did he wear some sort of a mark of a prophet? Don't know. But he recognized him, that he was a prophet. And the prophet said to him, "This is what the Lord says. Since you have let go from your hand the man I had designated for destruction." In other words, I put him in your hand, and you let him go. Your life shall be forfeited in the place of his life, and your people in the place of his people. Wow, sobering moment. So the king of Israel went to his house sullen and furious and came to Samaria. So Ahab's not doing so well with God's gracious provision. "I'm going to do this so you will know I am Yahweh." And he continues on his own path. He has better solutions, he thinks, than what Yahweh had in mind. And just as Exodus 34:7 said, he's not going to ignore iniquity. This man has disobeyed yet again, failed to wipe out the king of Syria. And he confronts him with it. And tells him what will happen. It's about to be compounded by what happens next. We're close to being out of time, but I want to set up for us, I want us to see the next event involving the king and his wife and a man by the name of Naboth. If you don't mind, I'll call him Naboth. That's how it reads to us. But I want to look at the first 16 verses here. We have one more class that will cover the end of this and chapter 22. But I want to sort of set the stage, set the table for what's coming next. Now it came about after these things. Well, after what things? After all that has just happened between Ahab and Aram. After these things, Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, the king of Samaria. And Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, "Give me your vineyard so that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is close beside my house. And I will give you a better vineyard in place of it. If you prefer, I will give you what it is worth in money." Seems like a reasonable offer. But when people offer us to buy our property, generally we don't have to sell. Somebody can say, I like your house. I'll give you a bunch of money for it. And you may say, I like my house too. I'm not selling. But Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid me that I would give you the inheritance of my fathers. This has come down through his family. He said, I can't do that. Ahab has no answer for that. Because the guy is right. And I don't know much about vineyards, but I do understand, I do know a little bit about vegetable gardens, because Kermit raised me. Vegetable gardens can be planted and produce fruit in a short period of time. Vineyards are not that way. Vineyards take work and time to produce the grapes, to harvest, to get the wine. And this was his inheritance. He wasn't going to let it go. And Ahab couldn't argue with that. So Ahab entered his house sullen and furious because of the answer that Naboth the Jezreelite had given him, since he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned his face away and ate no food. He's a spoiled child. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, how is it that your spirit is so sullen that you are not eating food? So he said to her, it is because I was speaking to Naboth the Jezreelite and saying to him, give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I will give you a vineyard in place of it. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Jezebel, always resourceful, said to him, do you now reign over Israel? In other words, you're the king. You're the king. Arise, eat bread. Let your heart be joyful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and to the nobles who were living with Naboth in his city. So she sends this to the elders and the noble men who lived at Jezreel. Verse 9, now she had written in the letters saying, proclaim a fast and seat Naboth at the head of the people, and seat 2 worthless men opposite him, and have them testify against him, saying, you cursed God, which would be a capital offense. And she adds, and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. Now these guys were probably people that she had influence over, and them having their roles. So the men of this city, the elders and the nobles who lived in the city, did just as Jezebel had sent word to them, just as it was written in the letters which she had sent them. They proclaimed a fast. They seated Naboth at the head of the people. Then 2 worthless men came in and sat opposite him. And the worthless men testified against him, against Naboth, before the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent word to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And when Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel spoke to Ahab, arise and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab got up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. And we'll stop there. Elijah is about to come back on the scene. Here is a king in Israel. And kings, we may hear some of this today from Johnny. What is important is justice for the people and righteousness. Justice. And here the king is pining after another man's possession, and he allows Jezebel. You might say, well, maybe he didn't know what Jezebel was doing. Well, if you think he didn't know, then why would he accept the benefit of the wrongful fruit? At the very least, he did that, which made him complicit. He got what he wanted, and she got it for him. And this was a fellow Israelite who was being treated with absolute injustice. We don't have a very hard time seeing that Ahab, and Jezebel was a big contributor, was the most evil of the kings of the northern kingdom. Forgive me for so much talking today, but I hope we see something of the character of God as he deals so mercifully with one who is belligerent and who continues to seek his own way. But he will not ignore his iniquity. He will not ignore that. That's coming. We'll finish that next time.
David, for 1 minute, can I?
Go.
When we read Kings as a history book, you get one thing out of it. When you read Kings as one of the prophetic books, as the former prophets, I think there's tremendous wisdom. And if anybody gets time, if you were to read Genesis 3, Genesis 6, Genesis 9, and then the Exodus 14 through 19, but just read Exodus 14, and then reread 1 Kings 19 and 20, and you've got garden, and it's exact, saw the fruit, and you see you see the people coming against Ahab of Aram. They see the fruit, they want to take it, they do all the things. Then at the turn of the year, whether you're talking about the Passover turn of the year or the Day of Atonement turn of the year, which he's commanded to purify and come clean, he doesn't. And then all your language goes from mountains down into the valleys, which is downward trajectory. And then your chariots and you're up against water. You're just literally replaying everything God's has. I mean, it is like word for word here. And then what do you see? You see the tables turning out. Ahab's taking the fruit that he wants, that he sees good in his own eyes, and then we're going to follow with his destruction, which is just like playing on the rhythm.
Yes.
It's the exact, it's wow.
Echoing what has happened before, for sure. All right. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah,
Have a good week.